It's Football Friday on News OK Live. I'm Mike Sherman, sports editor of the Oklahoman, joined here by a good chunk of the Oklahoman's college football coverage team. First of all, from his home in Oklahoma City, OSU beat writer Kyle Fredrickson.
Good to be here.
From the Oklahoma Blood Institute, columnist Berry Tramel. What are you doing there, Berry?
They're taking some of my platelets as we speak.
We'll get to that in just a second. And from a remote location, undisclosed, maybe in Green Bay, Wisconsin, OU beat writer Jason Kersey. Where you at, Jason?
I'm at home in Norman.
Ah, not too interesting.
No.
We're waiting with bated breath for columnist Jenni Carlson to join us. For the time being, all we've got is cardboard, Jenni. So, Berry, let's start with you. You were down there at Jerry's World for the big shebang, the first college football playoff championship game. You saw Ohio State roll in and dominate Oregon. What is the lesson of the first college football playoff?
Well, I think the lesson is let's not get too far ahead of ourselves when we look at what the committee does or when we see who the four teams are selected. Remember, on the night of New Year's Eve, all of America would have tell you that TCU got rooked and that TCU belonged in the field to the exclusion of Ohio State. And then, of course, the next day, the Buckeyes beat Alabama, and then 11 days later beat Oregon. So, I think let this thing play out. I'm each week I was critical to some degree of the committee's rankings, but they ended up, I think, getting it pretty close to right. And I thought the whole event turned out to be very solid for college football.
Kyle, you watched it. What did you walk away thinking?
I was just so impressed with the resolve of Ohio State. I mean, the way that Oregon went down and scored and the way they did it, there was no panic. And I think in the past we've seen teams go against this Oregon offense and, it moves so quickly, it can kind of be overwhelming. But, they were up to the task and were able to kind of get past that first score. And gosh, Cardale Jones, I mean, what else can you say about the guy in his third start, getting the national championship?
Jason? Ohio State had three quarterbacks who appear to have had the capability to either A, win the Big Ten, B, maybe win a playoff game, or three, win a national championship game. And somehow the Sooners are still looking for one. So I throw that out to you and ask you, what was your real takeaway from watching this game?
Well, yeah, I mean, that was a big part of it was just, wow, Ohio State's got three quarterbacks that are proven winners, and OU may not have any. I mean, that's pretty unbelievable. So, my takeaway from the playoff as a whole was, like Berry said, I think the committee pretty much got it right. The team that looked like it belonged there the least was the undefeated team, and you really can't leave the undefeated champion of a Power 5 conference out. So it would have been interesting if TCU had not lost to Baylor, what they would have done. I guess Ohio State probably would have been left out, and then they wouldn't have won the national championship. So another kind of takeaway I have from this is I wonder if maybe Bob Stoops was right a little bit about SEC propaganda. This is the first time the SEC has had to win a playoff to win the national championship, and they didn't even get to the final game. So that was another thought that I had.
Guys, what about this one? A gimmick looks great, works great until the real thing comes along. A gimmick, I hate to say it, but Oregon offense. The real thing, Ohio State's downset hut, power running game, power attack, power quarterback. Berry, you with me on that?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think Oregon's offense, it still was fairly effective. They had a couple of drops, and I don't think they were inept. So, I think the Oregon acquitted itself okay offensively. Like J.K. said, Oregon against Florida State was fabulous. So I don't know that this was an indictment of the Oregon system. I think it was more an indictment of not an indictment at all. I think it was just more of a Ohio State sort of got on a magic carpet ride. When you go down to your third quarterback and you're still able to play football like that against not just Oregon but also Alabama, you're talking about a special team that just sort of caught the wave. So I don't know that we can infer too much about Oregon's system.
Guys, as you look at that game and you think about Bedlam, you think about where OU is, where OSU is, where they're trying to get. How far away do the Bedlam brothers look, and who's closer to that kind of contention? Kyle?
You know, I think both of these teams are pretty far off as far as being in that conversation. But clearly, just looking at the way the two seasons have ended and kind of how we're projecting towards the future here, I mean, you can just look at some of the national perception on it, you know, and all these really way too early to tell polls that are coming out right now. OSU is ahead of OU, and I think that's, you know, for legitimate reasons for what we saw out of Mason Rudolph. I think Bleacher Report even had OSU ranked as high as number 16 entering the year, and that tells you so much about what having a quarterback does for, you know, your perception and for kind of how high your ceiling can go. And right now, I think that's the biggest difference between these two teams, and something we've talked about at length before is, you know, OU's quarterback troubles really limit what it can do, even when you bring in a guy like Lincoln Riley. So if OU can find itself a passer who can run its system, I think that expectations will continue to rise if it is a good fit at OU. But right now, with Mason Rudolph, all the weapons they have on offense, so many guys returning on defense, you know, I think as of right now that they have to have the edge in that conversation.
It almost makes you wonder what would happen if Mason Rudolph would have been the starter when the season started down at Jerry's World against Florida State. Let's bring in Jenni Carlson. Oh, she stepped away for a minute. There she goes. Okay, Berry, how far away are the Bedlam brothers? And specifically, which of the two is actually within shouting distance?
Well, I think OSU is ahead of OU right now because they do have the quarterback. You know, Cowboys are an intriguing team for 2015 in that I think they are going to go into the season as the third team in the Big 12, but they get TCU and Baylor both in Stillwater. So, you know, you got to give OSU a fighting chance. I think Glenn Spencer showed us that I think his defense is going to be at least solid most years because this was a major rebuilding year, and yet defense wasn't really the problem for the Cowboys. So I'm intrigued by the Cowboys in 2015, and Oklahoma's got to find a quarterback with a new system. But I know two things. One is new systems often invigorate a program offensively. It doesn't really necessarily sustain it over several years. It might, but it doesn't necessarily. But the first year of a new offense, there's an excitement level and a newness level that sort of has a nice effect. And, you know, the Sooners, with the 2 34-point defeats, raise all kinds of questions. But this is an Oklahoma team that went to Fort Worth, the team that everybody's excited about. TCU finishes third in the AP poll. OU went to Fort Worth and lost by 4 points. So this is not a team devoid of talent. It's not a program destitute. The biggest problem for OU, I think, outside of finding a quarterback, is the schedule. Go to Stillwater, go to Baylor, go to Manhattan, play Texas and Dallas. You know, the schedule's pretty brutal for the Sooners.
Do they go to Knoxville next year?
Is that in Tennessee? I'm not clear.
Okay, yeah, okay. That's a big game. Jenni, let's bring you in on this. We're talking about the quarterbacks, the need for a quarterback. We're talking about the national championship game. Braxton Miller, sort of floating out there. Cardell Jones says he's going back to Columbus, back to Ohio State. If you were Braxton Miller, you would do what?
Well, I mean, I think I would transfer. Now, if you're asking me where I would transfer, I mean, I don't know. I think if I was Braxton Miller and looking at OU, I mean, obviously it's an intriguing spot, but there's a lot of unknowns. I mean, you don't know exactly how this transition to Lincoln Riley is going to go. You don't know where the offensive line is going to be. You lost two really good players in Tyrus Thompson and Darrell Williams. You know, how good are they going to be? Wide receivers are clearly a problem. Are you going to have anybody to throw to? So is there intrigue? Probably, but is it a soft landing spot? It sure doesn't look that way to me.
Jason, are there better options for Braxton Miller out there, assuming that he doesn't just go back to Columbus?
Better than Oklahoma? Yeah, I think there are probably a lot of better options in Oklahoma. I think Florida State would be a good option. They're looking to replace Jameis Winston, and we know what kind of talent they have down there. That program seems to be in a little bit better shape in terms of their national perception and their chances to compete next year. If you're coming to Oklahoma to play quarterback, I think the first question has to be, who am I going to throw the ball to? You got Sterling Shepard, but who else do you got? You don't even have any tight ends anymore. Blake Bell's gone. Taylor McNamara's transferring. Deron Neal's been disappointing. Dorial Green-Beckham left. I guess if they get a really good receivers coach in, who can develop those players and get some more out of them, then maybe. But I've said that Trevor Knight did not play very well this year. Cody Thomas did not play very well this year. But the one common factor between the two of them was they were trying to throw to the same group of really bad receivers, and I think that makes a difference.
It makes a difference in the fact that Jay Norvell no longer has a Norman mailing address, or at least not for long. Jason, staying with you, Lincoln Riley will be introduced, as the offensive coordinator at OU this weekend. You've been writing a lot about him. You've talked to people about him. What will Sooner fans love, and then what will they hate about Lincoln Riley? Because they always find something to hate about the offensive coordinator.
Right. Yeah. They're not going to love him, I don't think. They don't love anybody. They didn't love Mark Mangino or Kevin Wilson, who both were excellent offensive coordinators. So, but I think there is a lot to like about this guy. He's young. He's exciting. He's got experience. Even though he's young, he's got a lot of experience. He's been calling plays for 5 years now. He's been a full-time FBS assistant coach since he was 23 years old. So, that's 8 years. So it's not like this is just some young punk who doesn't know what he's doing. This is a very experienced coach, even despite his age. So, I think that his offenses have been exciting. He's very innovative. He's smart. What they might not like about him, I wrote a little bit about this yesterday, that his red zone play calling has been critiqued pretty heavily. In the Birmingham Bowl against Florida, they only scored touchdowns on 2 out of their 7 red zone trips and an 8-point loss. He sort of has a very interesting and important role in the Hail Mary that everyone was talking about in early December when UCF hit the Hail Mary to beat East Carolina. East Carolina had come all the way back, had the lead, and then got the ball back with about 2 minutes left, and he sort of screwed around and took a couple of knees and then allowed his quarterback got sacked, and all of a sudden Central Florida had a chance to complete that big Hail Mary that everybody remembers. So there are certainly criticisms of him, but I think you'll find that with anybody. I think that if OU had hired Scott Frost, there'd be Oregon fans saying, he's not that great.
Would we have a China syndrome in Norman, Berry, if that very thing had happened on the hallowed grounds of Owen Field? Which is my way of leading into this question. Is this guy ready for Big 12 football? Is he ready for this kind of play calling? This is not the American Athletic Conference anymore.
Oh, there's no way of knowing, but I don't know why he wouldn't be. For crying out loud, it's not that, East Carolina is not Shippensburg, for crying out loud. And
shot fired.
That's not a shot. In my opinion, Mike Yurcich has shown he's capable. So I think he's got a lot of experience in the Big 12. I think he's going to be fine. The question is more personnel. Do they have a quarterback? Do they have enough receivers? The Dana Holgorsen offense requires about 7 or 8 quality wide receivers. I don't know if OU's got 3. So to me, that's the biggest question is the personnel. Does OU have the personnel to succeed immediately with Lincoln Riley?
Jenni, we talked about the quarterback situation, how that, alters everything, and especially our perceptions of OU and OSU. Now both schools got offensive coordinators not raised in the program. Yursich at OSU, Lincoln Riley at OU. Which of those two would you rather have calling plays for you?
It's an interesting question. I don't know if I know enough about Lincoln Riley's play calling just yet to pick him. But we've seen when Mike Yursich has the full complement, when he has his guys, when he has guys playing well, he can call a heck of a game. I mean, look what they did at Baylor, at OU, and in the bowl game. And that was with an offensive line that finally got its act together. That was with the quarterback that he recruited to OSU, that was recruited to play his style of offense, that could actually throw the ball, complete a pass or two. And OSU scored a bunch of points, did exactly what his offense was laid out to do. So at this point, I would say that Mike Yursich I probably know a little bit more about, and maybe you dance with the devil you know instead of the devil you don't, but I would go Mike Yursich at this point.
Kyle, let's stay on OSU football for a second. This week, Mike Gundy announced that Mason Rudolph would be his starting quarterback going into spring. Setting off, I don't know, surprise, shock. We made a headline of it. Why should this come as a shock to anyone, Kyle?
It really shouldn't come as a surprise that the decision was made. I think the more shocking thing when we look at this program and how it's handled its quarterbacks over the years was just the fact that there was a firm announcement made even before, spring began. I think that's a little bit more of the surprise to me rather than him being named the guy. But, credit to Gundy in this situation for not really playing games about who his guy is going to be. He said as much in that interview saying that, when it's this clear, why not just say it and make that the case? Well, I think you could make that same argument when OSU was heading into Bedlam when Gundy said it was a game-time decision between Dax Garman and Mason Rudolph. At that point, everybody knew Rudolph was the guy. After his performance in Bedlam in the bowl game, he only cemented that. But another important thing to remember here is, this isn't just Gundy being nice to the media or kind of trying to put questions to bed. There's more at stake here, because by him coming out and saying that Mason Rudolph is our guy, he's going to be telling recruits that same thing. When you have a quarterback with his upside and how he's performed, that's going to be another tool that the coaches are going to have to bring kids in by telling them that, look, we have this young guy who's played so well. He is our starter. He's going to be our quarterback. I think that does a lot to kind of firm confidence in those recruits. And if they like what they saw in those past 3 games, it's got to help knowing that they're going to be on a team, with a young leader who has all the tools and has shown some pretty incredible poise for being such a young guy.
Guys, what's the most important need for the Cowboys out on the recruiting trail? As you said, Kyle, and Jenni referred to this too, they're loaded at wide receiver. They have Emmanuel Ogbah coming back on defense. The back end of their defense was pretty young. What do you think the Cowboys need to go out and find, and is there something out there findable that's going to help them contend for a Big 12 title in 2015?
Well, it's got to be running back at this point. And even today, and this weekend is a big recruiting weekend for the Cowboys. A guy who's very high on their list, Chris Warren out of Rockwell, Texas, is going to be visiting this weekend with a teammate who's a wide receiver who also is interested in the program, Xavier Castile. So, those guys might end up being a package deal. They might not. But regardless, it's got to be running back at this point. And I think what benefits the Cowboys right now is they've built a little momentum at the end of the year. They can still go after some guys who've made verbal commitments to other programs, highly touted guys, who maybe see what OSU is doing, see they have an opportunity to get more playing time right away than maybe at some of those other bigger programs. So, this late push is going to be interesting, and no doubt that, it's a focus of Gundy and Yursich right now to get another running back, because they bring Rennie Childs back, and he's shown flashes of being able to make some plays, but really hasn't been much of a consistent runner. And behind that, they've got a freshman, Sione Palele, who did not play this past season, who figures to be in the mix. But beyond that, it's a toss-up. So, they're at least going to get one running back in this class. The question is, how good of a get can they have this late in the recruiting trail?
Jason, same question for you and the Sooners. What do they need to be out beating the bushes for? What are they beating the bushes for to try to bolster this lineup? and help them get back in contention in 2015?
I think that first and foremost they need linebackers. I think that's pretty obvious. They're very thin there. Jordan Evans and Dominique Alexander have been pretty good, but they need more guys, especially if they're going to play with 3 and 4 linebackers on the field at a time. They got a commitment from Ricky DeBerry, who I think is the best linebacker commit they've gotten in a long time. Maybe since, just off the top of my head, probably Corey Nelson. He's probably the best one they've gotten since Corey Nelson. But he was recruited by the defensive line coach, Jerry Montgomery. So Tim Kish is going to have to get out there and get one or two more commits, I think, to save his job. I think that if he doesn't, he's probably in trouble.
Guys, I was going to end it up by asking us to review our biggest misses from 2014, but maybe nobody cares to remember those. I remember mine. I think Doral Green Beckham had something to do with it, but we'll just let that there. Instead, I thought we would talk about one of the most appropriately named coaches of all time. Kyle, tell the story of the new OSU assistant and what he did on the sidelines, and can you think of a more appropriate name than Hammerschmidt for a guy like this?
Yeah, and to be fair to, this was just one blog post about the guy. We're going to write plenty about Dan Hammerschmidt, the assistant coach that OSU brought in from Houston. And he's going to be defined by a lot more than something he did back in 1997. But clearly it was an interesting story, and it shows how intense this guy has been over his coaching career while coaching wide receivers at Colorado State in the late 90s. CSU's playing at Wyoming. They're down 7-0. Everyone's kind of sluggish. And they get to the sideline, and here's Coach Hammer. That's what they call him, hammering away at his own face, just kind of just going nuts. He's bleeding and yelling at his guys and showing some pretty serious intensity. And it is interesting because as we've heard from Coach Gundy, he doesn't like having volatile sidelines where everyone's yelling. He likes to kind of keep that calm presence. Something that he pointed out during the year. So that story doesn't necessarily reflect the kind of guy that maybe they want to bring in. But like I said, that it was 1997. It was early in his coaching career. I can imagine at this point in time that he's not a guy who's going to be beating himself up on the sideline. But you never know. I mean, these coaches use intensity and kind of that fire to get their guys motivated. And if that's still the case with him, I mean, we'll see what kind of impact it has on that Cowboys secondary.
And Barry, the folks who are worried about Mike Stoops' sideline decorum, they can feast on that one.
Well, yeah, I mean, at least you can say Mike's never hit himself, as far as I know. I'm not sure he's hit anybody. He just looks like he's going to. So, yeah, it should be. Tell you, it's sort of an interesting time with such staff upheavals as we've had at both schools.
Jenny, of course, we have the famous Mike Baldwin story of Tim Beckman in the shower curtain. I think this trumps it.
Oh, yeah, I'd forgotten about that. Fortunately, thanks for bringing it back. Yeah, I think this is pretty wild. Although, it's interesting. I don't know if you guys saw, but there's actually some evidence out there that maybe yelling is a thing of the past. I think it was the Wall Street Journal did a big old story on Oregon's coaching, and they hardly ever yell. They played for a national championship this year, folks, so they didn't win it all, but they sure got farther than some yelling coaches we've seen around here. Interesting stuff. Millennials apparently don't respond to yelling like folks used to.
Jason, didn't one of Bob Stoops' lines that he's not angry, he just talks that way? Maybe that's what Mike Stoops is saying. I'm not yelling, I just talk that way.
Yeah, but Bob Stoops, when he's talking about those sorts of things, he's saying, that's how I talk, it's to us, not Mike Stoops screaming his head off at a player, and having the player scream his head off at Mike. I think that was one of the more, I don't know, accurate representations of the season when Julian Wilson and Mike Stoops were screaming at each other. It was just a bad deal.
Much more to come, of course, on coaching changes, recruiting coming up, and you can find all that and stay with the best coverage team anywhere, every day at News OK and every morning in the Oklahoman. That's all for this Football Friday Hangout. Thanks for tuning in.